As we close out this conference, we want to think as much about those who are not in the room with us today as those whose life's work, as the person whose life's work has brought us together. So I stand here now to represent the Pathways Collective, a gathering of feminist scholar activists who meet inside a maximum security state prison for women. We first convened in the summer of 2019 to read the work of Angela Davis and view selections from her papers here at the Schlesinger Library before the archive opened to the public. Moments from now, Angela Davis herself will be on stage, and I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you a poem we wrote collectively during one of our last meetings on the meaning of Angela Davis and the implications of her life struggle to us. Angela Davis is a hero, a giant, a voice for women in and outside of prison, a vision of what progress can do to each mind and heart, of what we can achieve collectively once we overcome the obstacles that prevent us from realizing ourselves. We will rise like plants shoot through cracks in concrete. We will soar like eagles over the highest mountains, floating through the clouds, hoping for a new vantage point. Angela Yvonne Davis is a freedom fighter who left her impact on the world. Her visions change with the times, and we have yet to realize them. Her vision is so healing, it terrifies us. The foresight of a future determined to prevail, the ability to aspire, to dream, and to imagine another reality for yourself through transforming the self can influence more than one, a community. That poem could not have been written. Indeed, our group could not have functioned without the work of Abbie Cohen, Communities Partnerships Lead at Radcliffe, and Elsa Hardy, PhD candidate in the Department of African and African American Studies here at Harvard, who spent hours traveling to the prison in heavy traffic for weeks on end, helped to gather and distribute materials, and facilitated discussions. And it is with great pleasure that I bring them up to this stage, followed by Kaia Stern, to share with you more about our work and the women in our group.
Thank you so much for your gracious introduction, Professor Hinton, and for inviting us to join you on stage this afternoon. We are here today, like all of you, to honor the life and legacy of Angela Davis. Whether addressing state repression of Black power, Black radical feminism, justice for Palestine, or the meanings and possibilities of prison abolition, throughout her long career as an activist and scholar, Davis has implored us to consider what justice and freedom can look and feel like. Perhaps what stands out most in all of this seminal work is Davis's insistence on the importance of transcending prison walls, which serve to keep incarcerated people separate and invisible. In her autobiography, she writes, "I became convinced that if we did not begin to build a support movement for our sisters and brothers in prison, we were no revolutionaries at all."
In that spirit, we, in collaboration with Elizabeth Hinton and Kaia Stern, spent the summer reading, thinking, and learning with a group of incarcerated students at a maximum security women's prison who, in one student's words, live what justice is not. We would like to note that students have requested that we have not used their names out of concern that their comments might be met with further repression inside of the prison. Guided by Davis's texts, our conversations made room for students to discuss how they conceive of injustice and justice, the myriad ways they resist, and how they imagine an abolitionist future. As one student described, "Where we are right now, this cannot possibly be the answer." What could a future look like, our group wondered, that emphasized communities of care rather than punishment? Students were also granted special archival status by Angela Davis and the Schlesinger Library, and were thus among the first researchers to engage with and analyze the papers in the Angela Davis collection, just recently made available to the public. We called ourselves the Pathways Collective, an ode to an enduring theme in our work together: pathways to justice, pathways that transcend prison walls, and pathways to each other.
Every day we are subjected to injustice in here, one student explained, but we can strive for justice within our spirit, to embody it in our own selves. Students describe the communities of care they have formed inside. the immense love they develop for one another in response to the often cruel and dehumanizing reality of life in prison. You don't expect community to come out of here, and it does, another student noted. Love and community were important aspects of the everyday resistance students described, as were their experiences in the prison's college program. Education is my resistance, a student remarked. And yet students were also aware of the gaps in their training. We've read so many feminist texts, one student lamented. Why hadn't we been assigned Angela Davis until now? Davis's work proved every bit as resonant and illuminating in our workshop as it was when it was originally published. Students described, for example, consulting Davis's text this summer when a friend, a Black woman, was torn about whether to wear her hair natural before the parole board. Though Davis resists individualizing her experience, one of the most remarkable contributions she has made is her insistence that the lives of individual people in prison, too often lost in grand historical narratives, matter. If, in one student's words, prison silences you and renders you invisible, Angela Davis has worked to give voice and visibility to the millions of people living in cages in this country and beyond. During one of our last meetings in late September, one student pointed out that even as those of us on the outside have become more critically aware of the ravages of the criminal punishment system in the last decade, the pendulum has swung further and further toward repression for those on the inside. This is likely not a coincidence. The more we learn about this complex, deeply rooted, fully functioning system, the tighter it coils around itself and the people within. There is still so much unraveling to be done. This work will require, as Angela Davis reminds us, listening carefully to our sisters and brothers in prison, but importantly, it will involve all of us. After all, the fastest way to give up your power, another student reminds us, loosely quoting Alice Walker, is to believe that you don't have any.
We are honored now to introduce Kaia Stern, someone whose career has, in many ways, been inspired by the life and legacy of Angela Davis. It may not surprise many of you to learn that she has taught Angela Davis every semester for over 2 decades. Kaia wears many hats. She is a professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Radcliffe's first ever practitioner-in-residence in the law, justice, and education focus area, the co-founder and director of the Prison Studies Project, the executive director of the Concord Prison Outreach, an ordained interfaith minister, a mother, and the author of Voices from American Prisons. Drawing on a background in ethics and community building, her work focuses on transformative justice. Kaia, who has taught in prisons throughout the country for the past 25 years, embodies the commitment to bearing witness to what happens inside and lifting up the voices of those rendered silent. Please join us in welcoming Kaia Stern to the stage.
Good afternoon. To the members of our collective who are not able to be in the room, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Radcliffe and Dean Brown-Nagin, for recognizing the importance of sharing Angela Y. Davis's unpublished work inside a prison before it is even available to the general public. And thank you, Angela Davis, for inspiring and guiding generations yet to be born. We are all so grateful to you. Words feel feeble. Before I continue, please join me in a moment of silence. To be still and quiet together. Please put away your screens, and if you're willing, close your eyes. Let us again honor the keepers, the indigenous keepers of this land, the workers, and with your eyes still closed, if you're comfortable, consider the people who are locked behind walls, on borders, and inside cells at this very moment. Mothers and sons, sisters and daughters, fathers and brothers. Not only hold them in mind, do as Scripture urges, Remember them as if you were imprisoned too. And remember their suffering as if you yourself were suffering. Let us invite the spirits of our ancestors into this beautiful space on this autumn afternoon. We are going to need all the wisdom we can possibly hold in our labor for justice. Thank you. In an effort to honor your life and work, we are, as you know, in conversation with women who are incarcerated in a maximum security prison in another state. Before I introduce their voices, I offer some local context. In a similar prison, less than 22 miles from this room, suicides exceed national averages. Most condemned women are people of color, single mothers with children under the age of 18, and 99.9%, according to state records, are victims, survivors of domestic violence. Trauma and psychotropic drugs are the overwhelming norm. There is an apparatus of domination in prisons across the country that rends women's bodies and souls. Forced sterilization, isolation, humiliation. Women of color are the most vulnerable. We know this. Together, our collective working group has been reflecting on the topics of this conference: revolution, feminisms, and abolition, reading Angela Davis's books, letters, and manuscripts with Toni Morrison's handwritten edits. We focused on justice as a thread to weave these three themes. In our conversations in that maximum security prison, we, Harvard visitors, were told the state of our lives is not reflected in all the talk about prison reform and abolition. As Kathy Boudin and Ruthie Gilmore reminds us, a student who has been incarcerated for 23 years was clear, quote, "Punishment is increasingly repressive, and the people around me are not getting what they need." Another student replied, "People know what happens in prisons, they expect it, and they are comfortable with it." We talked about the essence of justice and its perversion. Several students communicated the indescribable hurt of bearing witness to injustice. If an officer harms the woman next to you, you are rendered powerless to object because you are subject to state force. You don't do anything, and you have to live with that. And then there was the question none of us answered. Why do they hate us? Why do they hate us? If we are awake, this question may haunt us. In her autobiography, Angela Davis writes, quote, "I never forget the self-righteous condemnation of that tribunal. They were convinced they had a right to play God, master, and mother. Since we refused to accept their way of life, we were moral criminals, and they wanted to see us punished," end quote. In her groundbreaking book, Are Prisons Obsolete?, she writes that prison is a fate reserved for the evildoers, and it functions ideologically as, quote, "an abstract site into which undesirables are deposited," end quote. Religious ideology has long exalted violence against the so-called evildoers, and it is no wonder undesirables feel hated. Even though injury in the name of public policy is not limited to one sphere, Angela Davis's naming routine cavity searches as state-sanctioned sexual assault is momentous. Routinized violence punctuates everyday existence inside jail and prison. Farrah Griffin invoked the ravages of racial capitalism. I offer a note on the keeper and the kept. The punishment sector includes a massive workforce in jails and prisons across our nation. They come from the same socioeconomic communities, if not the same families, as the people who are locked up. In a jail or prison near a city, the overwhelming majority of officers are Black and brown. They are not the power elite. They are trying to put food on the table. Ask an officer how they are doing, and they may look at their watch and say, well, 4 years, 7 months, 3 days, 1 hour and 23 minutes until I retire. They, too, are acquainted with punishment as intimate disconnect, punishment that dehumanizes everyone, including those who are tasked with guarding in the name of justice. Our current catastrophe of mass criminalization, which includes mass incarceration and mass deportation, reveals profound alienation at every level. Alienation from ourselves, which often creates pathways of addiction and violence. Alienation from community, evidenced in abiding fear of the so-called other, the terrorist, people who are elders, poor, queer, brown-skinned, mentally ill, not saved, not chosen, not citizens, and spiritual alienation. It is as if justice itself is imprisoned, and it is fighting for its life in prison classrooms. There's a secret, though. Human connection is contraband in jail and prison. We don't say that out loud. It's not written in our policies, but anyone who has spent time in a jail or prison knows this. Sharing is punished as extortion. Officers get fired for smiling too much. Prisons operate as if the people in custody are state property. It is written across their backs. It is in the 13th Amendment to the US Constitution. Forbidden and undeniable human connection threatens the logic of punishment. Call it treachery or sacred space. Human connection in prison is somehow a smuggled good. Yet education in prison is transformative precisely because it is about human connection to history, science, art, and people. Thus, entering a prison classroom is like crossing a border into another territory of being in relationship. Davis writes that our most difficult and urgent challenge is to creatively explore what she calls new terrains of justice. And she reminds us that we need an array of alternatives that will require radical transformation of many aspects of our society. As we gather to commemorate history and celebrate the life of Angela Y. Davis, we, with immense privilege and social capital in such a vibrant and well-resourced community, must ask ourselves, what is our charge? What are we willing to do to realize justice? What is our internal work to support a revolution of consciousness? How do we grieve and heal in relationship to each other? How do we change imaginaries, practices, and structures that cause harm? We can once again turn to Angela Davis for inspiration. Quote, "Each day it was becoming clearer to me," she writes, "that my ability to accomplish anything was directly dependent on my ability to contribute something concrete to the struggle." As we pause to celebrate the mother of the movement, Dorothy Burnham, we were reminded yesterday that those who go before us make us who we are. In closing, I recall what Fania Davis shared about her and Angela's mother, Sally Davis, how she taught you that, quote, the world can be a better place, and you can make it so, together. We, members of the Harvard community, have staggering amounts of social capital and therefore immense responsibility to model a new kind of ethics in this wounding world. 2 years ago, 171 faculty signed the Harvard Crimson op-ed, "We are educators, not prosecutors," to urge Harvard University to respond to people in prison and people with criminal records in meaningful ways. One clear responsibility is to do our part to invest in prison education. To you, 171 Harvard faculty, thank you. Please check your email inbox tomorrow morning. Justice is a verb. Now, please join me in a warm welcome for Neferti X Tadiar, and of course, the woman we honor who embodies justice with force and grace, generosity and love, Angela Yvonne Davis. But before we welcome them, before we welcome them to the stage, I am so grateful to also call up Terry Lynn Carrington, Imani Uzuri, and Esperanza Spalding. Many of you heard of them last night, who will offer a special musical tribute. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's nothing left to say.
It seems appropriate that that was all nearly wordless because I think, hello everybody, my name's Neferti Tadiar, and I think you will appreciate the position I'm in and the the extreme, the keenness with which I feel the statement humbled by not only my friend, comrade, and Angela Davis, who I've known for almost 25 years, but by all of the people who spoke today, who spoke of all of the movements, all of the inspiration, all of the historical importance that Angela has brought. And so I won't repeat any of it today. I am here to facilitate you hearing from Angela. So it seems appropriate to start with the topic of music and the role of culture. I think that we want to start out talking about. It's been mentioned many times during the day and yesterday how important music, cultural production, art has been, and I think we would like to hear from Angela herself what importance she gives and how what the role of music and culture is in political movements, to her own development, etc.
Well, like I said before, I'm speechless, but this has been such an amazing gathering. And I want to take a couple of moments to thank Terry Lynn Carrington and Esperanza and Ivere. And since we're on the topic of art and culture, Terry Lynn Carrington has a new album that will be dropping on November 8th with her band Social Science. And the title of the album is The Waiting Game. So I've heard it. It's like nothing you've ever heard before. So, yeah, it's interesting. The older I get, the more I recognize how important art and music are. And as I was listening to them and thinking about all of you who've been here for the last how many days has it been? I mean, it's been so rich, it feels like we've been here for a long time, doesn't it? And listening to that music together creates a sense of community that goes beyond what is possible when one simply says, hello, my name is. And I think that we forget how much we need music, how much we need art and literature. And I'm also thinking about my friend Toni Morrison, who would have been here had the illness not claimed her life. And somehow those of us who write often think that we have the answer. But the most we can really hope for is to be able to formulate the right questions, or to formulate questions that lead us in a direction that only artists and cultural workers can illuminate, can show us the way. I don't know, you work with literature, and so I've learned a lot from your work also about how to think about the relationship between art and politics, aesthetics and politics.
I mean, there's a traditional way.
Well, maybe we should talk about how we know each other first.
Oh, okay.
Because
yes, you're wondering why we're here together. I think you should.
Okay.
It was your.
All right. I might embarrass you, but.
You decided.
Okay. Well, we were colleagues for a very long time at UC Santa Cruz in the History of Consciousness department. And I can remember when Neferti was hired because I was the chair of the search committee.
I like to say that you hired me.
But I'll never forget, after reading through, 150 applications, there were countless numbers of applications. When I saw yours, I said to myself, I didn't say to anyone, I didn't try to influence the rest of the search committee, but I said, she's the one. I knew instantly that you were the person we needed. And she came. We worked together on quite a number of projects, and we've been friends ever since.
When you called, I was at my parents-in-law's house, and the phone rang, and my father-in-law said, Angela Davis wants to talk to you? But yes, that was the beginning of our friendship, certainly the beginning of a different political education that I got in California with Angela and this particular scene of politics. And I think we'll talk a little bit about it, about women of color feminism in California. This was in the 90s, in the mid-90s. So that's one of the reasons I think that's how we know each other.
We also co-edited a book together.
Yes. Oh, I should have
Did you
gotten
bring it?
that. It's over. Can you give me the book? It's in my yes. We did as part of our work together at UC Santa Cruz, and I think it says something. Thank you so much. This was the book Beyond the Frame. Women of Color and Visual Representation, which we co-edited, but really was the work of a fantastic group of a fantastic cohort of women of color, at the time students, who later on became assistant professors and now probably full professors somewhere. But this was part of a project of the Research for the Study of Women of Color in Collaboration and Conflict.
I think you need to say that again.
Yes, it was a very striking title.
Yes.
The Research Cluster for the Study of Women in Collaboration.
Women of color.
Of women of color in collaboration and conflict.
And conflict. Yes. And it took us a long time to come up with that. Very awkward, but we needed it because we needed the collaboration, we needed the conflict, we needed the women of color, and we also needed, well, we were a funded research cluster.
Well, you received a presidential chair to head this, to be the faculty sponsor of this research cluster, which this is already in the mid-90s, I think?
Well, actually, I decided, the presidential chair, Bettina Apteker has the presidential chair now at UC Santa Cruz. There she is. And so when I found out that I had received the presidential chair, which was a weird situation because some people thought that I was the president of the University of California. And the then president of the University of California told me that he had gotten calls saying, why did you name Angela Davis as the president of the University of California? And he said, well, she's not our president, but we do have a campus named after her, UC Davis. But I think it came with, I don't know, Bettina, how much money? It's like about $100,000 or something like that. And so I used that money to fund the work for many years of the Research Cluster for the Study of Women of Color in Collaboration and Conflict.
Yes. I mean, I think we jumped ahead because we were going to talk a little bit about music and art, and you asked me the question of, what in my own work, art and literature is in relationship to political movements, which I've studied in the context of the Philippines. And traditionally, art and music were there to mobilize, to create community, to help to produce, feelings of solidarity, but it was always in a secondary role. Or you studied them and then you wrote about them. But I think one of the things that we had talked about was also the way that art is a way of knowing the world, a way of reorienting. It was epistemological as well as, it was a structure of feeling that could give you a knowledge of the world, a way of thinking and orienting yourself to the world.
Yeah, and of course, if one looks at the history of aesthetics, there is a reluctance to consider art as productive of knowledge. We don't want to talk about Kant and all of those other people here, but if of course, if you look at the third critique, the critique of judgment, we're talking about, Kant was talking about judging art and beauty, reflecting on it, thinking about it, but it was a judgment rather than knowledge. And I think that we recognize increasingly that art can produce a kind of knowledge that it has an epistemological effect that nothing else can approximate. In many ways, artists can show us where we want to go before we even learn how to articulate that in words. And so I'm just really really thankful that I've lived long enough to have the opportunity to not only think about these issues, but to better learn how to listen and how to enjoy. And I thank my friend Terry Lynn Carrington, whom I met 30 years ago, sitting in makeup for the Arsenio Hall show, I think. Because she was the drummer in the band there. And we said to each other as we were being made up, we said, oh, we should get together. And I said, yeah, we really should get together, but we didn't exchange information. And then a couple of days later in Berkeley, she walks into a restaurant where I'm having dinner. So I said this friendship was, but I really thank her for teaching me how to better listen. And that is a quality I think we need in our movements as well.
I think it also does another kind of work. Well, it's related to ways of, knowing, but ways of understanding differently, maybe sometimes paradigms or the conditions of the world that we think that we know so well because we've formed politics about it. We have a political theory, and movements sometimes can get very attached to their own political objects. And I have heard you caution movements from getting too attached to their political objects, and from cautioning academics from getting too attached to their objects of analysis. And I think this is a question about the way that music and art perhaps also lead you to, ways of seeing the world, in a way that questions some of the existing categories that we've been attached to, or how do they move people, or move you in particular, into another orientation to the world, which is connected to the way that you see yourself involved in so many other people's struggles.
Well, it's always hard to constantly question the categories you use to attempt to understand something. We aren't encouraged to question the tools, the conceptual tools, the categories. We're urged to understand the object, whatever it is. And we take, all that is necessary in order to, use those tools for granted. We don't question that which we assume to be the normal set of theories and methods. We question the object. But if we're to be truly critical, we have to learn how to question ourselves and question the tools that we are using. I mean, I've talked a lot over the recent years about the trans movement. And I think it's so important, not because of the fact that we need to acknowledge the pain and the suffering and the extent to which trans people, trans women of color, for example, bear the brunt of all of the different violences that we're talking about. But what is even more important, I don't want to set it up in terms of a hierarchy, but it is also important that we realize what we're doing when we challenge the existing binary structure of gender. We're challenging something that has become so normal that it has been beyond question. And by doing that, we recognize the possibility of challenging, all of the other categories that we take for granted, the categories that we work with. And I think art helps us to do that because it's not, if we attempt to simply engage in a process of self-critique, it becomes very difficult after a while when you have to second guess yourself every single thing you do, every single thing you say. But with art, we can experience it, we can feel it. We can feel ourselves going beyond the categories. We can feel our relations undergoing a transformation, if only for a short period of time. I really love the improvisations here and the sort of the calling to the ancestors, and I mean, we heard all kinds of things in the music, and that helps to create community among us. This is actually something I got from Kant, Skip. So.
Well, actually, the title of the book for the women of color was Beyond the Frame. I mean, in many ways, I think that was one of the projects of, that was one of the objectives of the project, which started out with a conference, with a writing workshop. Gina was there, and Saidiya Hartman, and I think Deborah Wright, and workshopping the papers. But I think what was coming out of this, and maybe I'd like to ask you to say a little bit more about this feminist method, this critical feminist method that was women, or that was and is, or where are we now with women of color feminism as a different method that was in some ways busting up the categories, as you put it one time, that you are questioning the categories, but you can also have a political identification, such a women of color, that provides you with a methodology that allows you to see outside the frames that we're given.
And I was thinking, it's very interesting, isn't it, that the cluster focused a great deal on visuality, on visual art, because we sponsored for many years a film festival. And I'm just remembering this now, when Julie Dash came to the campus during, I think it maybe had been the first or the second. That was before you arrived, I think, or was it? Or were you there? Well, yeah, I know.
Your memory's better than mine.
And we were focusing on visuality, not because we thought we could become experts, not because we thought we needed the particular tools and categories that are used in visual studies, but because we thought it was important to learn how to read images, and it was actually quite a remarkable experience. And we haven't talked about the women of color part of it, though. I think it's important because the conference has been pretty much black and white. Am I right? And we want to go beyond the frame. The black-white frame is what we have learned in this country, but we also know that as much as racism is rooted in slavery and the particular trajectory of people of African descent here, there's also colonization and indigenous people. They're Mexicans and Chicanos and Asian Americans. Remember, at the same time, I was a faculty advisor for the Pacific Island Student Association. And as a matter of fact, there's a wonderful image in a mural of me with a lei on my head from Fiji. it was because there were no Pacific Island faculty. And the students asked me if I would be their faculty advisor. And you worked with the...
I work also with a lot of Pacific Islander
and with the, yeah.
and Native studies.
Right, right.
But I think the beyond the frame, I think we both understand that as not adding so many other categories in the spectrum, but really thinking about, when you think about intersectionality, we're also thinking about the intersectionality of our histories. And this is related to your internationalism, but it's also related to the way that the women of color, not just in this cluster, but in the methodology of thinking about the histories that brought them to create the object that is in front of you, are very much intertwined, right? So, I think, when we're thinking about questioning categories, we have the binary gender, but I think you've also questioned the category of Black. And I think that, the work of Robin and Cedric Robinson in his last, I think Ruthie had mentioned it at the conference, right. About the capaciousness of Black and what would that mean in your travels in Brazil and your travels in Australia. And I think it was Trevor who also said the first day about against all the ethno-linguistic forced separations of communities that you learn to see yourself as Black, right? And how important that was. So I don't know if you want to say a little something about the way that in your travels and in your political involvements, the way that category is also moving, changing, connecting perhaps. I can say a little bit about how in the struggles that I feel like I'm involved in, how I would connect, not occupy, but connect.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's always been very difficult to talk about race. Stuart Hall makes that point. Because we talk about race as if it were a biological phenomenon. But at the same time, we're arguing that it's socially produced. And so, how can one escape always falling back on that biological essentialism? I think that political definitions of Blackness work a lot better. And I really appreciated what Du Bois said so long ago when he, in the conversations about Pan-Africanism that were unfolding, and he pointed out that what was at the core of the kind of Pan-Africanism that he could embrace was an anti-imperialist impulse. For me, it makes, excuse me, losing my voice. For me, it makes no sense to talk about being Black for the sake of being Black. I mean, for me, it makes no sense to talk about a notion of Blackness that encompasses everybody who looks a certain way, some of whom are on the Supreme Court, and some of whom are, but if we think about the importance of Black people in this region, it has to do with the struggle for freedom. I mean, for 500 years, who can imagine keeping that impulse to fight for freedom alive, generation after generation after generation, handing it down in the United States, in South America, in the Caribbean? To me, that is the Blackness with which I identify. And that Blackness is about the struggle for freedom. And so, therefore, it means that we embrace those who are involved in the same struggle. And we, particularly if we want to use anti-imperialism as a framework, we recognize how important it is to stand with those who were the first targets of colonization. And, you know, Harvard needs to develop a, what is it called, land acknowledgement, an official land acknowledgement, so that whenever events like this take place, there is an acknowledgement of the fact that we are convening on colonized land. And that the struggles of indigenous people deserve the kind of attention that has not been accorded to them. There's been a kind of discursive invisibility to which indigenous people have been relegated. Yeah, and you know, I was going to say something else, Neferti, that I think I told you before, that when the trial took place, and Bettina and Fania and Margaret and others, and Dorothy, hi Dorothy, I forgot, I was going to say, oh my God, Dorothy Burnham. She and my mother were best friends. And so when I look at Dorothy, I also see my mother. But during the trial, when the trial was moved to San Jose, there were no black people in San Jose at that time. There was just a sprinkling of black people. And so where did the primary community organizing take place? It took place in the Chicano community. There weren't any black people on the jury, but there was one Chicano man who played a really important role. I think Bettina writes about it in her book on the trial. So I personally am thankful for that. But you know, it's strange that we have to be encouraged to think in narrow terms. I think, you know, I'm always very optimistic. People accuse me of being an inveterate optimist. But I think people are capable of more capacious understandings of the world and of their relations to each other.
I think that in your case, and maybe this is something we could say a little bit more about, which is, it comes from Barbara Ransby's remark about being a black left feminist, about seeing what the structures are, you know, in capitalism, for example, that, you know, might actually bring people into relationship with each other, and that forms the way in which they start to feel that their struggles are either related or the same, or why, right? Why you would, and this goes to our own involvements in Palestine, why we would, Robin and I were on the delegation the year after you, and that was also the beginning of the boycott resolution at the American Studies Association. So there is this building, you know, your delegation the year before, and then us, organized by Majid Shiad, Sunaina Myra, and Rana Barakat. But the question is, the way that we see, and the delegation that Robin and I were on with Keolani, Kawanui, Bill Mullen, and Nikhil Singh was also, none of us were Palestinians, but we were all involved in social struggles that we saw were connected to, and we tried to think with Palestinians about our own, and the way that we could, you know, see things and share and dialogue. And I'll just say this one thing, that one of the first things I read of yours was the essay that was mentioned so many times already here, the role of the role of black women in the community of slaves, because there were several things that were mentioned there, and that became an important essay for me as well, to understand the two things. One was the role of violence in domestic work. The Philippines is one of the major global exporters of domestic work in the world. It is a class of servitude, I think, that service labor and servitude labor that I think we haven't really talked about so much, but is very related to the absolutely expendable lives of people incarcerated, but also in the Philippines now, 27,000 extrajudicially killed by the war on drugs. Very related to the war of drugs here and criminalization, right? It is a position of blackness, if you will, for those people in the slums. But the importance of your essay, you were talking about the context of slavery, but there were two things that it allowed me to think about, which was the importance of racializing, sexualizing violence in capitalist conditions in the present day, the importance of punishment in the making of conditions of servitude and the conditions of reproductive labor that is effectively forced labor. But the other thing that I think that was really important is the way that you had transformed the notion of rape into a form of terrorist counterinsurgency, which meant that there was some insurgent potential as well, right, in those relations of, the domestic household in black women. And so it was very dialectical. But anyway, so it's the question of how it is that as a black left feminist, and your analysis of capitalism leads you to see the connections among struggles, and that leads to your own involvements in internationalism, radical internationalism.
Well, thank you, Neferti, because you've evoked so much reproductive labor and the new scholarship that takes seriously reproductive labor and considers reproductive labor as an integral element of capitalism, whereas those of us who trained as Marxists in the past had been led to separate productive labor from reproductive labor. But that would take us a very long time. And
yeah, that's the timer.
We only have 38 seconds left?
Apparently.
Well, shoots. Yeah, we had planned to talk about so much. But yeah, your question is so rich, because it also points to the feminization of labor under conditions of global capitalism. And as you pointed out, the use of Filipino domestic labor literally all over the world is a topic that we should also think about in relation to the role of domestic workers here in this country, the role of domestic workers in France. I think about that amazing film that Ousmane Soben did that was called La Noirde, about this Senegalese woman who was a servant for a French family, and taken to this to the south of France, Antibes, I think, and she ended up committing suicide. Soben said he actually read an article in the newspaper about a black maid, a Senegalese maid who had committed suicide, and he then created the first feature-length film in Africa south of the Sahara that was released, I think, in 1969. Am I right? Yeah. So, you know, I think that we cannot even begin to exhaust the possibilities of thinking in new ways about reproductive labor, about domestic work, and you know, recognizing Premila's amazing book was evoked before, the part that domestic workers played in creating what eventually came to be known as the Civil Rights Movement. And I guess what I'd like to say, I know I'm kind of a stream of consciousness all over the place because all of the ideas from all of the panels are swirling around in my brain, and I kept thinking, but you didn't learn that from me. I learned that from you. Over and over and over again. And I wasn't the first person who said that. You know, I was simply trying to capture the ideas that were circulating at the time. And I think we can have our conversation on interdisciplinarity in that context. It's kind of, as we wanted to talk about interdisciplinarity in a really serious way. You know, not just bringing the disciplines together, or not, you know, someone who does interdisciplinary work takes a little bit from history, you know, takes a little bit from sociology, a little bit from this. But, you know, what it means to formulate questions that cannot be answered within the context of one discipline, that require us to travel elsewhere, including outside of the academy. Because I don't think we value enough the knowledge that gets produced in the workplace, in the context of struggle. And you know, one of the reasons I thought you were the person who really needed to come to HisCon at that point was your interdisciplinary work and the fact that you were trained in Marxism, you know, Marxist political economy and literature. And so, yeah, so why don't you talk about that a little bit?
No, I think it's not about me, but I think just to...
No, but it's about interdisciplinarity.
About interdisciplinarity, I think that this is in keeping with your own thinking, which is what I think we had in common, which is that, you know, when you think of the problems that you are trying to, you know, illuminate or answer, you can't be defined by the objects that define disciplines. You can't, you know, most of our disciplines are defined by objects. You know, literature here, history there, you know, science here. You know, like, for example, you know, today, if we were going to link, it was mentioned by Kathy Boudin, the migrant detention centers, you know, the way in which the US state is thinking about migrants and, you know, the intensification of the policing, patrolling, and the producing of deathscapes for Mexican and other Latin American migrants across the U.S.-Mexico border, how to link that to domestic work, or how to link that to, you know, to mass incarceration, which is different from the detention centers. In fact, you and Gina wrote a piece called "Prison as a Border," in which you tried to think about prisons as borders and borders as also functioning very much like prisons. And in that way, you were defining a problem that couldn't necessarily be approached by a single discipline or a single method. It would have to, you know, be dictated by the forms of knowing that were required to solve the problem, which is...
And this is the issue that we're referring to, being too attached to objects that, For a long time we talked about whether critical prison studies should actually be institutionalized. On the one hand, you say yes, these fields of study should be institutionalized. How else are they going to develop? But on the other hand, if you say yes, they're subject to all of the pressures of institutionalization and often lose their transformative capacity. And so we were thinking about critical prison studies. What does an academic do who embraces abolition, but studies the prison? And you know how scholars become attached to that which so there's a contradiction there, right? And the only way to do this ethically is to imagine the object of your study disappearing. And not only to imagine it disappearing, but to work so that it no longer exists. And that's pretty hard. But I think that we're at the beginning. I always kind of think we're at the beginning of something really interesting. It feels like that, doesn't it?
To you, I think. No, but this.
I don't know.
No, I mean this very, very seriously because we're kind of over time, but so I did want to get to the last question because we have students who are going to ask you questions. But this is about what many already have remarked about on in the last day and a half, which is your capacity to generate hope in the midst of, what a lot of people would consider a very melancholy, nihilistic situation. And, there's a lot of depression about the world today. And therefore, when you say we're at the beginning, I feel like you're already formulating a way for us to generate hope.
Yeah. I think historical perspectives are important, and it may very well be the case that what's his name? Don't say his name. Okay.
45.
The occupant. I like what. And you have an occupant in the Philippines.
The occupants are friendly with each other.
Yeah. And
all places.
Gina and I just came back from Brazil.
And there's Modi, and there's Israel.
But in Brazil, they call him Ocoisio, which means the thing in Portuguese. So we had a lot of fun. But given the horrendous conditions in Brazil, the assassination of Marielle Franco, and by the way, we met with her mother and father and sister and daughter, and they were so excited, and they really believe that it is possible to create another world, despite the person who will not be named. And sometimes we're too short-sighted. We assume that what is happening right now is what will forever be. And this is the lesson I think my sister said we learned from our mother, who always talked about, and Dorothy, who always talked about other possibilities. And of course, it was Walter Benjamin who said, hope is given to us for the sake of those who are hopeless. And so that is one of the primary goals of our movements. Now, we have to generate hope. And how do we generate hope? Well, I've had the habit for a very long time, I don't even remember when I acquired it, of trying to think seriously about people engaged in struggles in other places where I don't necessarily know people. I can remember becoming introduced to the Algerian struggle when I was very, very young. And I always say I went to France because I thought I was going to find freedom, the land of liberté, égalité, fraternité. But then I was told that I might be mistaken as an Algerian. And so that was my introduction to the Algerian Revolution and reading Fanon. But right now, we've talked about Palestine and how generative of hope Palestine has been for us who are struggling in this country. It's not simply about offering a kind of one-way solidarity. And unfortunately, sometimes the assumption that we are doing better than our friends in wherever, and so out of the goodness of our heart, we're going to offer them solidarity. That's not the way it works. That tends to reinscribe the very conditions of superiority, inferiority, even as we think we are challenging them. But I know we're having to end now, but I want to talk about, or at least evoke what's happening in northern Syria. And I want us to think very seriously about those who have not only been struggling against ISIS, and by the way, there are huge numbers of women among those troops, among the Kurdish troops. And I've been following the Kurdish women's movement for a long time. As a matter of fact, when we were organizing around critical resistance back in 1997, 1998, there was a death fast that was happening in Turkey that had been undertaken by Kurdish women prisoners. They were protesting the institution of U.S. prisons, U.S.-style prisons. They call them F-type prisons in Turkey. And so now we see that they have been involved in this amazing experiment in democracy. If you want to know why, what's his name? He who will not be named, withdrew troops from northern Syria. It has to do with this amazing socialist, democratic, feminist experiment that has been happening in that part of Kurdistan. And I'll just say one final thing. Beth was talking about gender violence, and I was saying that what we see there in this beautiful experiment that has been disrupted is that domestic violence, intimate violence, that we've fought against for so long without doing really important things, but we haven't really been able to figure out how to curb gender violence. And they've begun to do it because the men and the women alike who are armed, I guess if the woman is armed, that's like, but I don't think it's only about that. I think it's about an ideological struggle that they have been consistently engaged in, to the point that women's liberation is at the heart of their notion of Kurdish liberation. And we need to know about that. We need to provincialize ourselves. We need to recognize how provincial we are, and that people in the US do not have the answer in the way it is always assumed. And so for me, that's a sign of hope.
That's a good point to stop. I think we are running over time, but you did promise to take some questions from some students. There are 5 questions, I think, that were prepared. I think they're going to ask them. They're right here. And so if we could have the first 3 questions, and then the last 2. So please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bradley Few. I'm a senior here at Harvard. And first, just thank you so much for being here. It's been an amazing honor and privilege to hear you speak today. And I am taking Professor Higginbotham's class this semester, The Northern Side of the Civil Rights Movement. And one of the things that we've consistently been debating in class is the definitions of this rather unstable concepts of success and failure in the context of the various case studies that we've been reading and looking at. And so my question for you is, what does success look like for the social movements of today? For example, what does success look like or what would success look like for Black Lives Matter, in your opinion?
Hi, my name is Mila Callender, and I'm a sophomore at Cambridge Regent Latin High School. And my question is that James Baldwin wrote in an open letter to my sister, Miss Angela Davis, "If we know, then we must fight for your life as though it were our own, which it is, and render impassable with our bodies the corridor to the gas chamber. For if they take you in the morning, they will be coming for us that night." With that said, how would you describe your relationship with male civil rights leaders and activists? And was Baldwin's support for you the exception or the rule?
Hi, I'm asking this question on behalf of Desiree Lara, who had to step out, unfortunately. She was a student, a part of Summer of Hope this summer here at Radcliffe, and is a Boston Public School sophomore. Her question for you is, your entire life's work from the past until now, I imagine, has come with moments where you were exhausted, mentally, physically, spiritually, and maybe you even wanted to give up. I wonder how you kept going. What advice would you give to someone like me who tries to fight the good fight for justice, but sometimes feels so tired I want to give up?
Should I just do these 3?
Yes.
Okay. What does success look like? I wish we had a lot longer to explore that question, because it's a very complicated question. But for me, success consists of figuring out how to ask the right questions at a particular moment. And those questions may not be eternally the questions that need to be asked. And thinking about how one moves forward, how one acquires more knowledge, to me it is not so much about avoiding mistakes. It's about learning how to make mistakes and learning from those mistakes. I think we learn much more from our mistakes than we do from what we do completely correctly. And so success is also not having to make the same old mistakes over and over again. I always think that what we as older generations have to pass on to younger generations is the capacity to make new mistakes. And we share our knowledge. So sometimes it's called our wisdom, and sometimes it's wisdom, sometimes it's not. But in order to allow you to make your own mistakes. And I don't think there's an ultimate point where one can say that this is freedom. We're there. I mean, what did Nelson Mandela say, Trevor? He said, so the long walk to freedom, each time one thinks that one has reached the top of the mountain, there is another ahead. And so and I've said this many times, what I find really exciting and energizing about our struggles is that we increasingly recognize what we did not know. And if someone had asked me to define freedom 50 years ago, I would have said, we have to free the black man. That would have been my answer. And now it's so much more complicated precisely as a result of the wonderful activism and scholarship, male civil rights. Do you want me to name all of my wonderful male comrades? Well, many years ago, when I was involved in an organization called LA SNCC, it was right after I had been in the Black Panther Party, I think, Erica. And SNCC didn't last a long time, but it did amazing work. But the problem was there were those who thought that the women, and there were problems like that in the Black Panther Party as well, that the women shouldn't take leadership. And I was working with a group of amazing women who were great organizers. And I mean, there were some guys who were good organizers too, but it's usually the women who do that work, in every community, it's usually the women who do the work that isn't recognized. And so the guys would show up whenever there was a press conference or a rally so that they could take credit. But the point that I want to make to you is that it really was not a gender war per se. It wasn't the women versus the men, because there were women who believed that women should play a secondary role. That the women should be doing the education and the cooking and there were also men who believed in gender equality. So I characterize that as a struggle around gender, not between or among the genders, but around the role of gender. And I don't think that we should, make the mistake of making assumptions. Even when I say cisgender, heterosexual white men, I know that there are white men in the audience who know that I'm not talking about them. Well, anyway, it's late, and I wish we could continue, but the last question is about exhaustion. I think I am totally exhausted now, but it's a beautiful exhaustion. I get tired. Everybody gets tired. You can't keep doing the same thing all the time without getting tired. So take some time off, And I think we have emphasized community so much. And who was it? Was it Robin or some? I don't know, one of the Robins. I don't know which one. It said something about, cultivating a sense of community so that when you need to step back, you know that there's someone who will step forward for you. You know that if you need some rest, if you need some time off, you're not going to be leaving the struggle without leadership. We should have realized that a long time ago, and I don't think we did. But I think what's good about the younger generation is that they insist on incorporating a sense of the need to take care of everyone, and that they recognize the difficulties and the traumas, so that we learn how to meditate. And thank you, Erica. Erica was talking about me practicing yoga, but Erica was the person, people thought she was crazy, but who insisted that we try meditation. Remember, you were trying to convince Huey to meditate. Well, I say this seriously because I think things might have ended differently for him, He did try. He did try. And all we can do is try. Yeah, all we can do is try. So just take some time off. Have fun. We're not going to move in a forwards direction unless we can feel pleasure in the course of engaging in the struggle. If it's all sacrifice, if it's, all bad, then no. But we have to learn how to, generate joy and pleasure in the process of doing our organizing, and I think that's what has allowed me to remain in this movement, because there's never been a point where it has even occurred to me that I would leave the struggle. I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know what to do with myself.
We just have 2 more questions.
Hi, Professor Davis. First of all, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to answer our questions today. My name is Nicole Fintel, and I'm a freshman here at Harvard College. So when reading your book, Are Prisons Obsolete?, I was struck by the following quotation. An attempt to create a new conceptual terrain for imagining alternatives to imprisonment involves the ideological work of questioning why criminals have been constituted as a class, and indeed a class of human beings undeserving of the civil and human rights according to others. So, with nearly everyone in our society breaking at least minor laws on a regular basis, including traffic laws, jaywalking, or underage drinking, we all technically fall under the category of criminal. Yet only a small number of us are deemed less intrinsically moral or less worthy of full human dignity as a result of these criminal actions. How did this distinct class of criminal come into being, and why do we deem only some people who break laws to be real criminals?
One more. The last question.
Hi, my name is Salma Abdurrahman. I'm a senior at the college studying African American Studies, and I'm also an organizer with the Harvard Prison Divestment Campaign, which is a repertory justice initiative that seeks to sever Harvard's financial ties to the prison industrial complex, not just private prisons. We are a group of committed students and community leaders who, following the guidance of formerly incarcerated and presently incarcerated organizers, seeks the abolition of prisons in the carceral state. First of all, thank you for your theories, strategies, tactics, and vision, for providing our campaign and me personally with a guiding light and a way to live. Our movement wants to know, what do you conceptualize the role of the university to be in dismantling the carceral state, and will you take a stance in support of the Harvard Prison Divestment Campaign to divest from the prison industrial complex and reinvest in affected communities? Thank you.
Well, the first person who asked the question, I think you know the answer to that. I think you know it has something to do with racism. I think you know it has something to do with the class structure of our society. Am I right? You already knew that, didn't you? But the question you raise has to do with how this notion of criminality gets ideologically constructed, to the extent that people see a young black man with pants, kind of baggy pants, walking down the street and make assumptions that he's a criminal. And I'm not only talking about white people. I'm talking about people of color. I'm talking about black people also succumbing to that ideological effect. I mean, this is why critical thinking is so important. I know you take, those of you who are students, you've taken all your critical thinking classes. But use what you've learned. Be critical about these issues. And of course, I would support your efforts to persuade the university to divest from the prison industrial complex. Absolutely, absolutely. And I also want to say that Robin Kelly spoke about the graduate student organizing on campus, and I really want to offer support and solidarity to those of you who are doing the union organizing and developing ways to minimize sexual harassment and gender violence. And I guess I should end by thanking everybody. I know there's so many people to thank. There's Skip, there's Jane, there's Tomiko, there's everybody. Elizabeth, who did an amazing job organizing. And I mean, I know almost everybody in the audience, it seems. So this has been a remarkable experience. I have to tell you that when I saved all that material, I had no way of imagining that it might culminate in something like this. I just knew that I shouldn't throw it away. And my sister, I don't know where she is, but I asked her about her papers, and she said, "Oh, I throw things away all the time." And so it was quite amazing to look at the exhibition, because I didn't even know I had all of that stuff. It's been packed away for years and years. And all I can hope is that not only people who visit the archive, but people who learn about these struggles in other ways, who learn about the valuable work we did to organize critical resistance. I want to thank Cassandra Shaler, who's here, who's one of the organizers, Gina, Ruthie. Is anybody else here from the organizing committee? Because when we started, we said, we are going to change the way people think about the prison in this country. It was just a little group of us. And I don't think we really believed we could do it. But we decided to use the term prison industrial complex precisely because it might shift the way people think about prisons, that they would think about prison in a different way. It's just so beautiful to see all of the work, the scholarly work, the activist work that has emerged. And to me, that's a major victory. We may not be there yet, and we may never get there, but we will definitely we will definitely be on our way. And I think it's the on our way, it's the voyage, it's the journey that is so beautiful and revelatory of human potential. Thank you.
Angela Davis is so beloved that even our insect creatures just cannot keep away from her. I don't think there's anything that I could possibly add at this point except to express my deepest gratitude once again to our participants. And to quote Erica Huggins, who said in our first session today, Angela Davis, thank you for being born. And thank you for producing the archives that have yet to come. Thank you.